Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Thanks, Shira, and thank you, Global Patties. You know, each week we get to talk about how much we appreciate our sponsor support, and you know we'd rather get right into talking about bees, but you know we need to appreciate our sponsors. They are critical to help making this all happen. From the hosting fees to software to hardware, microphones, and recorders, they enable each episode. So with that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms, the sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinators. Learn more in our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor Kirsten Trainer and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. And also check out the new 2 Million Blossoms, the podcast, also available on our website or from wherever you download your shows. Hey, everybody. We're finally back to you. Thanks for joining us. We're truly happy you're here. Hey, Kim, how's your fall going?
It's 72 degrees. The sun is shining. There's a little breeze today. It's probably the nicest day we've had since, about 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow. I wondered why you're sitting there next to the pool and with your feet dangling in there. Well, how are your bees doing?
Well, it's a mixed bag. And some are doing good. And some are doing great, and a couple aren't doing good at all, and I can't tell you why.
In other words, it depends.
Yeah, it depends. Yep. Nothing's changed.
I'm so far so good. The bees are looking real good here, and I just was looking at my broodminder sensors online today, and you can see that the queen is shut down pretty good just because you see the lower temperatures in the brood chamber area. They're kind of compacting that brood nest size. And that's kind of fun to monitor and see the weight's kind of holding steady. So that's a good sign. So I'm hopeful for this year. I've done my OAV treatments, so they're all pretty much set. Other than monitoring.
Well, we're close to the end of the goldenrod flow here, and it has not been extraordinary, and that is never a good sign.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed.
Yep.
Hey, each week we ask our listeners to write or leave a voicemail with the questions, and this week we have Elizabeth who left a voicemail on the website. Let's listen to it now and see if we can answer her question.
Hi, Kim. Hi, Jeff. This is Lizbeth from Western Massachusetts. The interview with the wasp catcher was fascinating, except you didn't answer the most important question I had, which was, what on earth do humans do with wasp venom? So many questions. How do they get it? What do they do with it? What else are wasps good for? Please tell me more. Thanks. Bye.
Well, you're right, Elizabeth. That is a good question for people who haven't had much experience with it. I can tell you exactly what they do with that venom because I have had to use it. When allergists begin to work with you and you've got an allergy to something, and let's say it's honeybee venom, one of the ways that they treat you is they begin to expose you to minute amounts of it on a regular basis, and your body gradually grows tolerance to it. And a lot of years ago, I went through this treatment. It took about 3 months, and they get you up to the point where your body can absorb the venom of 3 or 4 stings. And if you continue to get stung on a fairly regular basis, your body will maintain that level of tolerance, and you won't die when you get stung, which is a good thing. So people collecting venom, yellow jackets, hornets, whatever it is, honeybees, are performing a service that basically keeps me alive.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah. Zach, Zach, who was our guest for that short bit, we'll have him back on the show when he's out of his busy season, and we hope to have a representative from the lab he works with too. So we'll have a full episode dedicated to the hornet collection and the yellow jacket collection from that side, and then we'll talk to the lab and find out in further detail how they actually go about collecting the venom. So that'll be a fun show. Watch for that coming up in the near future. Thanks, Elizabeth, for your question. Hey, everybody. You too can leave a question just like Elizabeth did by clicking on the little microphone icon in the lower right-hand corner of any web page on our website, and we'll answer the question on an upcoming podcast.
Hey, Jeff, I happened to catch just recently a podcast by Tom Theobald. Do you remember Tom?
He's been
on our show.
Yeah, he's been on the show a couple times.
Yep, 2 queen colonies and his beekeeping techniques.
He's talked about neonicotinoids too. Yeah.
Yes. And he wrote for a local newspaper for about 30 years. And what he started doing is going back 30 years and recording those columns. And you get one a week. And it's called Notes from a Bee Yard. And it's not a lot about beekeeping, although bees are the thread that take it. But it's what life was like, what things interested him, what things didn't interest him. Much more than bees and beekeeping, but bees and beekeeping is the thread. So if you want to go back 30 years, and he lives in Colorado, you'll get a taste of life a long time ago.
You know, it's fun listening to Tom. It's a wonderful podcast. We'll have links to it in the show notes. When I moved to Colorado from Ohio, that was one of the first things I picked up was the local newspaper because it was in the Berthoud Recorder. His articles from the bee yard, and of course Sherry knew him from working with the National Honey Board. So for me, it was really it was something I look forward to every week, reading his columns and actually now listening to the podcast where he's reading his articles, his columns in his own voice. It's fun. It's really very folksy, very homey. I encourage our listeners to, if you're looking for a good beekeeping related podcast, to check it out.
Yeah, I knew him all those years ago, but I never read any of his articles. So you were there. You get to read them firsthand. Well, I'm catching up.
It's time well spent, Kim. Time well spent. Okay, well, we have a great show coming up. We have David Aston, who's an author and researcher who just released a book called Good Nutrition, Good Bees. It's a great book, isn't it, Kim?
Well, it is, but it's not at all what you might expect. I've had the chance to read it, and the review is in Bee Culture, and he's gathered facts and put them together in ways you would not think, like what kind of nutrition do bees need over the course of their life? Because their diet changes. You know, we talked to Gloria, and it's different in the spring and in the fall. What do bees need that do a lot of foraging versus what do bees need who do a lot of house cleaning? And what do drones need? And where do you get venom? So it's this will be fun. I'm eager to talk to him.
Yeah, it's real good. So let's get right into that. But first, a quick word from our friends at Strong Microbials.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbials Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
And while you're on the Strong Microbial site, make sure you click on and subscribe to The Hive. their regular newsletter full of beekeeping information and useful product details. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Sitting across the virtual Zoom table right now from us is Dr. David Aston of Yorkshire, England. Thanks for staying up so late and joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
You bet.
It's good to see you again, David. It's been a while at the National Honey Show some time ago, but I'm glad you could make it today.
Thank you, indeed. Yeah.
Well, we invited David, as we've mentioned before, we've invited David here to talk to us about his new book. It's just been released. It's called Good Nutrition, Good Bees. And in the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the importance of honeybee nutrition. And if you're looking for one book to have on honeybee nutrition, I suggest this is the book you get. It is just packed full of information. It'll keep you reading for a long time, and it'll answer many questions and help you develop a few more along the way. David, this is a fantastic book. You wrote it with a writing partner?
I did, yes. I wrote my wife, Sally.
Oh, very good. And she's also a PhD, I see, in biology?
That's right. I mean, she's basically a plant scientist and then joined me at Aberdeen, where we did a master's in ecology. She stayed on to do a PhD working on the byproducts of whiskey distillation, Scotch whiskey. And I stayed on working on birch, and then we got it together, and the rest is history, as they say.
The late night studies on the whiskey distillation must be some study parties, I have to imagine.
It was very, very, very interesting time, yes.
Fantastic. Well, good. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your beekeeping history. I know you're very involved in bees as well. You're more than a researcher, just a researcher.
Well, I've retired now, thankfully. I spent my career, actually, believe it or not, working in the industrial wood preservation industry. And that's where I spent all my working life, from the technical, environmental, commercial sides, marketing sides of the business. And I was fortunate to travel quite a lot around the world, doing various things. And then my wife decided I needed a hobby, because her grandmother was a skeppist, so she said, "Why don't I think about doing beekeeping?" And actually, it fitted quite well because, as I said, I was traveling quite extensively, so I something that I could organize around my work, and so I got started, and I just got hooked by it, absolutely fascinated, and by it, and so I went into our beekeeping associations, got very much involved in the education side of beekeeping, on the technical side, and so on, and then eventually became chair of the British Beekeepers Association, and eventually the president. I'm a very, very small scale beekeeper. Maximum number of hives now I keep are 10. Partly that's because of physical capabilities to manage them, but also, more importantly, how much forage there is available to my bees without having to migratory beekeep them, and which is something I really, with my personal circumstances, don't have the time to do. So I have about 10 colonies now at the moment at the top of my garden.
Well, 10 will keep you busy a lot. There's no doubt about that. I'm at 3, and it keeps me busy a lot. So, well, David, when I went through this book, what I came away with, if I review lots of books, and what I try to do is sum up the essence of what this book is in a sentence, 2 at the most. And what I came up with your book was applied nutrition, applied honeybee nutrition. You've taken the science of nutrition, honeybee nutrition, and nutrition in general for living things, and you've applied that information, grouped them together, and made me aware of what bees need, when, and why. Am I summing that up about right?
It's absolutely spot on, yes, indeed, because beekeepers now, they're very much taught a mechanistic way of keeping bees, probably with very little understanding of the natural history of the bee and things like that, and certainly not really taught at this, I don't think now, to observe, both in terms of what's going on in the hive, but more importantly, what's going on around in the environment, which is going to provide the forage for the bees. So it is applied. So the idea being that the beekeeper, or in fact the people that are generating the policies for land management, whether they're farmers or even gardeners and so on, have an idea of what honeybees, and it is honeybees that we focus on in our book, require for sustaining their colonies and for being able to thrive.
You've directed some attention to the people who are planting plants for bees towards the end of the book, and I want to get back to that because I found that I'm a plant person also. I found that very interesting. Just to go over the beginning of the book, you started with the history of the honeybee in the British Isles, and I'm gonna mention it, that there's that chapter, and then I want to move on quickly to the colony life cycle and composition that you looked at, more of the bee biology, if you will, and then honeybee physiology. And in honeybee physiology, you were talking about the fat body, and the fat body, honeybee fat body, has garnered a ton of attention in the last few months because of its role with Varroa. Can you tell us a little bit more about your perception of how important the fat body is?
Well, it seems to be a very important body, mainly from its protein storage properties. And also the fact that, as we've seen with work that's been done, I think by Dr. Samuel, with the Varroa consuming the fat bodies and the impact that has on the physiology. So there's the actual contribution that the fat body makes to the honeybees' physiology and so on, and the fact that it's a potential target for a pest. And if that pest gains access and damages the fat body, then the individual honeybee is in trouble, and hence the colony is in trouble.
Yeah. Speaking of fat body, there's been some mention about it lately that there's really no photographs or drawings of the fat body. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I was asked to write an article for a magazine, and I looked around for fat body pictures on the net, as you do, and in whatever books that I had, and really, even one of the most recent books by Professor Lipinski, his fat body picture is quite difficult to see. And I've tried to photograph it, and it is quite difficult. It can be quite diffuse through the body cavity of the bee, certainly.
Yeah, I want to warn our listeners to make sure you're very explicit in your Google search for fat bodies. Make sure you say it's honeybee fat bodies. Otherwise, you might see something you're not expecting.
Your fellow countryman of yours, Ian Stell, had an anatomy book out, and if I was going to go anywhere looking for pictures of honeybee anatomy, that's the book that I would use. So,
does it have fat body in it?
Yes.
All right.
And he does a nice job. He has photographs, but he also has drawings, and the drawings are specific. So
I've not had the pleasure of reading that yet, Kim. But yes, I've seen some comments about it, and it looks very, very interesting.
Yep, it's a good book. If you can't find what you're looking for anywhere else, I would go there. But you're right on the study of the fat body. I'm glad that that secret piece of information is finally being exposed, because it is so critical to Varroa control, without a doubt. Well, then you move on And you just talk about the key nutrients that bees need, and I'm not enough of a nutritionist to know the value of some of these compared to the value of others. And if you were going to look at this, you name them all, and you talk about where they come from and things. Tell us a little bit generally, if you would, about the nutrients that bees need.
Well, my experience or our experience in researching for this book is it was a bit like an onion. You peeled off one layer, and then you came then to another layer, which you then had to work your way through. And so you could envisage the general headings of compounds that were important. But then, as you looked into the research, the publications, the degree of interconnectedness of these substances actually became quite mind-boggling to cope with. So you sort of start off at the levels of carbohydrates, and then you find carbohydrates are themselves quite complicated materials, chemicals. Then you get to proteins and the amino acids and the essential amino acids, and then vitamins and etc. etc. It's surprising actually that there is still not a lot of knowledge about many of these substances and exactly what the bees need and when they need them in their life cycles. Now there's more and more research being published, and one of the troubles in trying to write something for the general reader is the moment you've written something, it's immediately out of date because somebody's published some more information, and that was a big challenge for us.
Better Bee is pleased to sponsor today's episode of Beekeeping Today podcast. For over 40 years, Better Bee has supplied beekeepers across the country with the tools, equipment, and knowledge needed to succeed. Because many Better Bee employees are beekeepers themselves, they understand your needs and challenges and are better prepared to answer your beekeeping questions. From their colorful catalog to their support of beekeeper educational activities, including this podcast, Better Bee truly lives up to their tagline of beekeepers serving beekeepers. See for yourself at betterbee.com.
Jeff, I think one of the things, I don't know if you caught this out when you were looking at the book, is and it made me sit back and think a bit. The nutrients that you and I need, that bees need, that all animals need, some of those nutrients make some part of me. Or feed some part of me, for instance, skin and muscle tissue. Some parts of it are bone and hair tissue. Think about this. The nutrients that bees need, some of it produces the exoskeleton, some of it produces venom. How is venom made?
Good question. I'd have to go deep into the book and find out. I don't have the information on the top of my head, but what I'm hoping is that that's just the kind of question that a reader or a possessor of this book would think, I'll go to that section on venom and find out. And then hopefully there's enough information there either to satisfy their immediate needs or some signposts to point them as to where they might look for more information. But certainly there do seem to be certain specific substances that are part of the production of the venom gland, and so again, and they seem to come from certain parts of certain sort of plant families.
Yeah, this is I think the most applied part from my perspective of nutrition is you talk about all of the things that bees do and make happen in a colony. The bees that feed the queen, the bees that forage, the bees that are feeding the young, the bees that are creating beeswax, the bees that are carrying out the dead. All of these require different strengths and different nutrient, what do I want to say, different diets, I guess maybe is the way I should put it. And the bees that are foraging have to find the materials that these bees need to do that. So they're looking, I'm wondering, are bees out looking for the stuff that makes venom?
I don't know. I can't. I still have an open mind as to from the literature now. A more informed reader may be able to put me right, but I'm still not sure whether the bees specifically go out looking for specific substances, specific chemicals. When they go out looking for specific materials like pollen, like resins for propolis and the various nectars. Now, whether they actually specifically look for, say, materials that have got terpenes in or other chemicals, I really don't know.
So you've got a bee out there sitting on a flower, tasting it, and going, "I'm looking for the stuff that makes bee bread or something, and this doesn't have it, so I'm going to go to another flower." I can see where some of these are very similar. The food that you feed to the young and the food that you feed to the queen is probably very similar, and I'm going to guess because so much of it is used, it's probably fairly common in the plant world.
Yes, as raw materials. It's then what the bees do with it, and then how they synthesize it in their hypopharyngeal glands and so on. That then impacts on what is done with that material.
One of the other questions that comes up in the book, and that I've always wondered about, if you've got bees that can't find the right food, because you talk about the forage in the landscape, there's not enough of it out there, or they get just almost enough, but then it runs out, or there's a freeze, or something happens, and then what happens if they don't get any of some of these things? Does a colony, just a bee perish? Does a colony perish? What I liked is how you address that, and knowing, if I'm a beekeeper, knowing that what's going on out there right now is important, and it needs to keep going on for another 3 months so all of my baby bees get raised, that sort of thing.
Absolutely, and I think that what we've seen with the national survey work that the British beekeepers have done over the years, how important starvation actually is. Now, that's a fairly end point situation. And there's an awful long way between being malnourished and undernourished and then actually starving. So really, I think, and I would suspect that a lot of honeybee colonies, certainly in the British Isles, are suboptimal in terms of their health. And so when any pests and pathogens come along to challenge them, they are somewhat weakened to be able to cope with them.
You also spent a fair amount of time talking about feeding. Because beekeepers at some point in time are going to need to feed. And you talk, what I found interesting is, because you have different kinds of equipment than we do here, is what do you use to feed bees with? I want to talk about what do you feed them in a minute, but you addressed a range of different kinds of feeders. And tell me about how you feed bees.
Well, I'm talking now as if you like, a hobbyist beekeeper, small scale
right.
beekeeper with bees at the bottom of the garden. I'm not talking about a person who's from the point of view of somebody who's managing tens, perhaps hundreds of hives, which we do have some what we call commercial beekeepers in the UK. So they're all scaled up and will transport their sugar syrup around in more bulk sized containers. But for a person like me, I will apply the if it's a liquid feed, sugar syrup, from white granulated sugar. There's various sorts of ways that we do that, either contact feeders or frame feeders within the hives, and they've all got their merits and their complications in terms of using them. So I'm sure it's the same in your neck of the woods. There's so many gadgets that you can and use. But I think the principle really is being able to place the sugar feed in a position where the bees can access it readily and utilize it. And that's the trick.
Make it easy.
Yeah.
Basically, right. What do you think of high fructose corn syrup?
I start with my bee feed philosophy from the point of view I don't wish to feed my bees. I will manage. I try and manage my priority beekeeping strategy is to manage my bees so I don't have to give them any food during the year at all.
Wow.
Now,
well, I'd like to be able to do that.
Yeah, and no, it's very difficult to do, and in most years I have to supplementary feed them at some time. But my philosophy is as I say, to leave enough stores, maybe supplemented a little bit at the back end to survive over winter. But increasingly important, I think, to actually have a good population of bees in the summer. Because I think a lot of the damage which is done to colonies for overwinter survival is because the bees that are produced in the summer, they're malnourished because of impacts on forage through weather pattern changes, landscape changes, agriculture intensification, etc., etc. The bees that are going to produce the autumn overwinter bees themselves are in a poor condition to produce these extra special bees that are going to take the colony through the winter. So nutrition is a year-round activity. Now, in terms of your specific question, I have no experience with using it, and I judging from what I've read, I don't think I'd want to. But
that's a good answer.
That's a personal. A personal view.
Hive Alive is a liquid feed supplement for honeybees, and right now is the best time to feed it to your colonies. Hive Alive contains a blend of seaweed extracts, thyme, and lemongrass, a unique formula which improves bee gut health, resulting in more bees, honey, and improved overwinter survival. Now, Hive Alive has just launched their new fondant patty, which contains the correct dose of Hive Alive, vitamins, and amino acids, and comes in easy-to-use pouches which are great for giving to colonies over winter. Ask about Hive Alive at your local beekeeping store or visit the website www.usa.hivealivebees.com for more information.
Well, and looking at, you mentioned a malnourished and undernourished colony in the summer. Do malnourished/undernourished bees forage less often, die young? What would a malnourished colony do different than one fully nourished?
Well, I think it would be the quality of the subsequent generations of bees, the worker bees in the colonies as they're raised. If the nurse bees are poorly nourished, they are going to not be able to produce sufficient food for their young developing larvae. They're in turn going to be malnourished, and at a level, at a metabolic level, probably then vulnerable to disease.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess what I'm thinking of is that in the middle of the summer, and I'm looking at my colony, and there aren't as many bees as I thought there should be, but the queen seems to be performing adequately, if not excellently. But bees that aren't, they're bringing in enough food, but it's poor quality, and that's because of what's available. That colony then isn't going to be able to raise as many young, or the young that it raises aren't going to be as healthy, or I'm trying to look down the road here.
Yeah, probably all of those.
All of those, yeah. Okay.
In different combinations and to different extents. I mean, one of the challenges we have certainly in the part of England where I live is we get now extended periods where there's very, very little forage for the bees. And so that the colony's nutritional status really dives. But what I've not really seen, and it will be interesting to do, is actually some studies, some assessments of colony nutritional status, however you define that. And I think that's a gap in the literature, which I've not really seen. Certainly not for beekeeping in this part of Europe.
Well, that's brings up or in line with a recent guest we had on a recent episode, Dr. Gloria Hoffman from the USDA ARS Bee Lab in Tucson, Arizona, and we talked with her about the importance of seasonal pollens, fall pollens for going into winter and spring pollens going into the summer, all along the lines of the bees needing what they need for that time of season. Have you seen? I mean, this is all related. Have you seen that in your literature, in your reviews, the importance of the seasonal pollens?
I've seen references to it. The question really is their relevance to the British flora.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I mean, I think there's work being done I think it's Greece, and there's work been definitely done in the States, of course. But then you've got to relate that to what is the flora that we have in Britain, and bearing in mind that Britain itself is quite it's very diverse from a floristic point of view in a relatively small geographical area, and so you can have a big variety. But in general, what we're seeing now is that there's a huge reduction in the floristic diversity. Number of species is getting less and less and less, and so basically the bees are, in my view, and certainly what I observe with mine, is they're just having to go out and forage what they can get, and so whether there's any degree of selectivity or anything like that, it will be quite difficult to determine, I think.
Yeah,
it's what you can get rather than what you want.
That's right. Like around here, we have. Right now, it's in one of those drought periods for us, basically from June to October, and during this early part of the season, I know the honeybees will not visit what we call the false dandelions. They're not true dandelions; they're a false dandelion. They ignore them because there's plenty of other sources. But now the false dandelion, that's the only thing that's really up and sprouting up through the brown grass or grand fields. And of course, they're after that they're taking what they can. So I have to believe that exactly what you're talking about. They're picking up what they can. It's not their.
We have the same issue here with bees foraging on sweet corn.
Mm.
They're taking the pollen out of that now. Now has a very low crude protein content and limits in terms of some of the essential amino acids, and yet the bees will, if they're working that, in my view, that shows they're in extremis sort of situation.
And they're packing it away and storing it, and they'll have it available sometime later in the season, and it won't. So you'll have trouble down the road, because of what you collected, and the second half of that is, well, that's all we got to eat.
Yeah.
Take it or leave it. Yeah. And
shut up and be quiet. It's what we're eating tonight.
I think what we're also seeing very much here is that we may have a crop, shall we say, something like field or tick beans, or even oilseed rape. I think you call it canola. Is that right?
Yeah.
We get very dry. We've been having very dry periods, so the flowers have been set very quickly, and they're withering very quickly, and all the nectar's drying up very quickly. And so we've had like lots of field beans planted, but there's very little in the way of nectar availability, and with a lot of other, and because of the paucity of flora diversity, they really are thrown back on very, very little resource. Now, I mean, the honeybee, of course, has the advantage that it has the mechanisms to forage on a wide range of flower species. But when you compare that to some of the behaviours of some of the bumblebees, some of the more specialist bees, then if their forage flowers species aren't there or are not producing, then it's small wonder we've got problems with some of the other bee species.
I can see how that happens. Having watched bumblebees forage on the same flowers that honeybees are foraging on, they attack them very certainly differently. They're bigger, they're stronger, able to get at some flowers that maybe honeybees can't get into.
Indeed,
and what that brings me to was the parts, what you did with plants. At the end of the book here, you did so much. You looked at plant families and the nectaries the type of nectary that they form, and it really makes a difference for a honeybee, doesn't it? The shape and the size and the depth of the nectaries.
Indeed, and there's the actual physical limitation of the length of the proboscis, but also, of course, the weather conditions can affect the amount of nectar. If it's a flower that's more like a tube, and the nectar rises in that tube, the honeybee can access it better, and then so whereas if it's a period when those particular flowers, buddleia is perhaps an example, the nectar falls in the tube. The honeybees can't get at it, but other species can. So it's not just the actual basic flower structure; it's the environmental conditions at the time when that flower is out. Yeah.
And what was the flower you used as an example?
Buddleia.
I'm not familiar. Are you familiar with that, Kim?
Yes.
Okay. I know that was going to throw our transcription service off, and I didn't.
I went out my mouth, and I thought, perhaps I shouldn't have mentioned that one, but because I was trying to think what it would be called in the States.
Okay.
Well, the other part of the plant, what else you looked at in the plant world was what plants these are for the landscape people now who are looking to improve forage in their area. So what do I plant, and what's the soil that I'm planting it in, so that I get the best plant in this for the type of soil that I have. That I don't know anybody that's looked at that previous to this.
But it's an attempt really to give some guidance to people who are designing planting schemes and people who are putting together seed mixes or whatever they are. But the other thing that I wanted us to also do was cover trees, because trees are actually a very big potential forage source for honeybees. And I mean, I can't remember where I read it, but people talk about one tree being an acre in the sky in terms of forage equivalents, and you can see that, I think, in some species like limes and things like that. So that's another facet of what we try to write, to give guidance to or interest to people who were either designing these schemes or policymakers who were considering what they could do.
So if you got clay soil, Jeff, that's what was the word you used, David? Calcareous, right? That's lime-like. Yeah.
Yes.
It's very
calcareous. Yeah.
Yeah. pH positive. If you've got that kind of soil, Jeff, you're going to be planting something different than if it's very acidic. And although the plant may live in both places, it will thrive in one and not so much the other, and or grow differently. So,
well, I wonder if what it provides nutritionally is different based on the soil it's on. I mean, that's basically what you're saying, right? So, but you put the same plant in a acidic soil and the same plant in alkaline soil, will it provide the same kind of nutrients?
I think it's what happens in that situation is where the nutrients get to. Do they actually get into the flower itself, and then into the nectar? So they've got to go through the nectar secreting process, or do they get into the pollen? And that's another field of study really, in terms of understanding what the relationship is of these flower species with their nutritional value.
Interesting.
Well, there's some way you can spend the next 40 years of your life, Jeff, examining the nutritional value nectar from different locations from the same tree. When you have nothing better to do.
In my spare
David,
time.
this has been fun. I know it's a huge book, and we've just barely touched on any of the aspects. But what have we missed that you find that you think people should know about?
The thing we wanted to do with this was to re-engage the human species, with the honeybee. Because at the moment, I think the honeybee is very much seen of as being livestock, a species to be exploited. And of course, when we look at the news feeds in terms of honeybees having problems, of course, we see all the kind of practices which are done in the States with migratory beekeeping and the vast numbers of bees and that sort of thing. And actually say to try and get people to understand, in fact, we've had a long relationship with this particular species, and that's in fact what makes it fascinating in terms of the sort of history, the sociology, and all those sorts of things. I'm trying to engage people to re-look at this particular species and understand why it is so significant to us. It's not at the moment, certainly in this country, there's a strong lobby for people to promote the concerns about other pollinator species, which is fine. Bumblebees, solitary bees, wasps, moths, or all those sorts of things. And the tendency is to be a little bit disparaging towards the honeybee because it's managed, it's exploited. And we wanted to try and just readdress that balance a little bit. So we try and encourage the reader and the public to perhaps look at these insects in a slightly different light, because they have been so much part of our culture and in our society.
Definitely, it's a good thought, and I encourage people to get a copy of this book. It's easy to read. You're not going to sit down and read it in 4 nights. But you're going to refer to it again and again and again, I think, when you've got specific questions on. And I'll go back to my original thought. Applied nutrition, I think, is a good way to describe this book, how nutrition plays all of the roles that it plays. David, thank you again for being here. This has been fun, and I hope your book does well.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
It's been great having you on the show, David. Thank you. Hey, Kim, 2 shows back-to-back on honeybee nutrition. I think that's a fantastic topic and so much to learn.
Yeah, there is. And the 2 people that we've talked to are shedding lots of light on the things that we don't know. This book, of course, is a huge book. It's, what is it? It's 428 pages long, and there isn't a picture in it. It's all copies. So there's a lot of information. It's good information. I'm a plant person. I love the fact that he's looking at the structure of plants, the family of plants, and the value of the kinds of plants where they grow. So it's there's all of that, and then there's everything else that bees need to be bees.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend this book for every beekeeper out there. On your bookshelf, if you're a beekeeper, there should be, all of Kim's books.
Of course.
There's 7 or 8 of them, aren't there? Right. So, but if you have only the funds for 3 books, make sure 2 of them are, the ABC XYZ of beekeeping and this book on nutrition. And available from Northern
Bee Books, right? Well, you can get it on Amazon. I mean, it's Amazon available too, wherever books are sold. But
the nutrition is such an important key aspect, and it's only now just becoming into its own spotlight. I mean, there have been people who've been focused on it in the past, but the importance is coming around. It's turning the spotlight.
Well, you're right. There are people over the years who've looked at in great detail at very, very narrow pieces of the role that nutrition plays in a honeybee's life. This is the one that, like I said, I consider to be applied nutrition. What do you need to know about nutrition? And What does it do? Why do they need it? All the questions are answered for all of the questions. So
And it's based on available
Yep.
research. So that's really, really good. And, readers, the listeners, if you look at it and there's a couple pages, a couple sections on beekeeping in British Isles and everything, don't let that throw you off. The meat of the book, majority of the book is on the honeybee nutrition. So get this and add it to your collection.
Yep.
All right. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like. You can get there directly from our website by clicking on reviews along the top of any web page. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We want to thank Strong Microbials for their support of the podcast. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. We want to thank Better Bee for being a supporter. Check out their full line of beekeeping supplies at www.betterbee.com. And finally, and most importantly, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments to questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, Kim?
I'll stress that again. Feel free to send us questions or comments.
That's right. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.